Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So, since a bunch of you really enjoyed our previous video where we kind of talked about our gear, well, we're building that new PC for editing, and again, not our full-time thing. This is just kind of another fun vlog-style video about the PC we're building for editing, software development, some game development possibly in the future. And we're going to talk you through the specs. We're going to show you us building it. This is not a build guide. There's plenty of great videos out teaching you how to build a computer. We're by no means experts. We've built a few PCs, but probably stick to the experts. Again, I hope everyone's staying safe. We're going to keep making videos, and we're going to do our best to keep that content coming because we know a lot of people enjoy to watch our videos, and if you're stuck inside, it's kind of nice to see familiar faces and such. So, without further ado, let's get into the PC. So now I'm going to go through all the components we chose for the PC. Remember that this is a PC primarily for video editing, rendering, software development. It's kind of got to do it all. And so we went with pretty high-end parts, but not, crazy high-end. We tried to be reasonable. Again though, some of these things we chose because we had experience using some of these parts before and we enjoyed them. So I'm going to start here. We have this 1 to 8 Pwm Fan Header. This is for our case because we're going to have a number of case fans, and so I'm not sure if the case we have, which you'll see in a bit, has a hub with it, so we got a hub. They're cheap. This one's from Silverstone. Next up we have this. Now this is something a lot of people don't put in their computers, but something I like to. The kind of theme of a lot of my PC builds is kind of resiliency, durability. As you guys saw with the Pelican case, I'm kind of paranoid, so I like to make sure everything's really secure and it's not going to break if it gets shaken around a bit. So this is a GPU support, and this essentially stands and holds our relatively heavy and large GPU just so it doesn't kind of sag, and if it gets bumped around, it kind of avoids the GPU getting damaged. Here we have our CPU cooler. It's a Corsair 240mm AIO liquid cooler. I was recently talking with one of our patrons, and by the way, even if you're not a patron, feel free to message us about computers. We're really interested in it. If you have questions about what kind of computer you should build, specs and such, we'd probably be pretty happy to help. But I was talking to one of our patrons about PCs, and they mentioned, well, we were both discussing how there's basically no reason you should use a liquid cooler because air coolers are basically just as good. However, there is actually one detail, and that's that if, like me, you're a little uncomfortable having a giant hunk of metal hanging off your motherboard, having something like this that's completely screwed down on all points, that is nice. So this, if your PC were to tip over, it wouldn't rip your CPU socket completely off your system. So that's one benefit of an AIO liquid cooler. For our power supply, we have the Corsair RM850X. I've used a couple of the Corsair RM series power supplies. 850 should be more than enough for us, and I do like the modularity of this power supply. For our SSD/storage, we have a 500GB Samsung 970 EVO Plus. I've used these SSDs before. Because we keep most of our media on external disks, as we showed you in the previous video, which will be linked somewhere up here, we have no real need for more storage internally right now. If we were to do that, it would probably be more SSD storage because, again, it's a little safer if your PCs to get shaken around, etc. We also kind of move around a bit, and so having the flexibility of an SSD is nice. It's also obviously really fast, and Samsung makes great fast SSDs. For our RAM, we went with 64 gigabytes of 3600 megahertz Trident Z memory with a cast latency of 16, I believe. So it's a little high cast latency, but the speed is great. And the reason we went with that fast RAM is because we're using a Ryzen processor, which is kind of, where it's at these days. And for Ryzen processors, they recommend faster memory. We went with an Aorus X570 motherboard. I quite like the Aorus stuff. I'm not really a huge gamer, but the thing is, if you want high quality parts, there's just a lot better selection if you're kind of choosing gamery parts. So I went with this Aorus board. I've used Aorus boards for the last several PCs I've built. They're really good. They have a lot of like metal DIMM slots, metal PCI slots. They just are really tough, and I quite like that. And I've never had a problem with a Gigabyte or Aorus product, and so no reason to change and use something different. For our CPU, we're using the Ryzen 9 3900X. It's 12-core processor, not the highest end, but the 3950X, which is the 16-core variant, is almost twice as expensive. We bought almost everything on sale, and at least when we were buying this processor, it would have been almost twice as much to get the 3950X, and you're definitely not getting anywhere near twice the performance. So we went with this processor, and we could always upgrade to a 3950X in the future if we wanted. We have these are custom cables. Good. We have these are custom cables sleeved from Cable Mod. You'll have a look at them later. This is probably the least necessary thing in our whole build, but the one great thing about custom cables for a modular power supply, and these are really easy. You can just look up Cable Mod and then your power supply model, and you pick up some cables, is that these are super flexible, and so they're really nice if you're in tight spaces and you don't really like, you know, some of those uncomfortable 180 or 90 degree bends you have to do with regular power supply cables. These are super flexible and they make it a little less stressful. So that's why I like these. We have our mouse and desk pad here. It's from Aukey, nothing too much there. And then this, so we chose EVGA GeForce RTX 2070 Super. It uses the same GPU as the 2080. The Super cards are obviously just slightly faster than the non-super cards. We didn't go for a 2080 or 2080 Ti because NVIDIA's 3000 series cards are meant to be coming out in the future, like later this year, and so if we're going to end up upgrading, it's not worth going for the highest end. Plus the 2070 is already really powerful. And it's kind of the same story as with the processor. You can go to the highest end model, but you're going to end up paying almost twice as much and not getting nearly twice the performance. So that's kind of all our components. Now let's get on to putting the PC together. Now for the case, because it's too large to get out, so I'll show you it now. We went with this Silverstone model. I've actually never used a Silverstone case before. This is the PM02. It's a pretty nice muted design. I don't want something super crazy with tons of RGB or anything. The benefits of this case, lots of filtration, all intakes, etc. Everything's filtered. You have, of course, top filtration and space for our radiator that we're going to be installing in it. Again, just a nice muted look, a cool design on the front. And probably the nicest thing about this case is that it has 4 140mm fans included, which is just, yeah, it's nice to have so many fans included in a case, and yeah, it's pretty robust metal. It does have tempered glass, which I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of because it makes cases really heavy, and you know, that's not necessarily the greatest thing if you are moving around. But the nice thing about tempered glass is you do get to see your pre-PC inside. So that's the benefit there. There is a filter here, but I'm so curious, I don't know how you're supposed to get this front part off.
With a little bit of elbow grease.
So we just took off the front panel so you guys can take a look at the filtration. It's really nice. Good filtration in front of all 3 140mm fans in the front. You have a really heavy metal beefy front panel. And what's nice is that it's connected via these ball mounts, which means you don't have to feel like you're breaking the front panel every time you remove it, which is awesome. Also, worth pointing out is that this case does feature some lighting, and that it projects a Silverstone logo, which you can kind of see in there, down onto your desk, which is kind of neat, I suppose. power supply here, warranties, etc. I really recommend you take all your warranties, put them in one place. Do not throw them out because PC components have awesome warranties, typically really long ones, and especially things like power supplies, which could be like 5-10 year warranties. And no reason you can't use this in your next PC. So keep all the warranty information, etc. Super useful. Some cable ties and stuff. Power cable. Here. And then we have our actual modular cables, which we will not be using because we have an extra kit. So one of the nice things about these power supplies, beyond the fact that they're just really nice looking and super high quality, is that they operate at 0 RPM fan mode when there's low load. And since our PC is definitely not drawing anywhere near 850 watts, this fan may never run, which is awesome. Plus, the case has filtered intakes for the power supply itself, so it's just all around a good setup. So if it looks like our PSU is installed upside down, nope, it's not. There isn't really a right side up, as I mentioned before, and the reason it's installed this way is just so that the intake is pulling air up into the system. So now what we're going to do is making sure that our power bar is on. We're going to plug the power supply into the plug, and then we're going to use our ESD strap. It's important that you actually plug your power supply into power, because if you do not do so, well, then you're actually not going to be grounded. So that's very important. So I'm going to take the motherboard now and install it next. Now, I used to typically install my CPU before putting the motherboard into the case, but what I find is you can sometimes get your CPU a little dusty, etc. if you do that. So I'm just going to go right ahead and put the motherboard into the case, and then once that's done, I'm going to actually put the CPU onto the motherboard once it's been already installed in the case. Before I go and install the motherboard into the PC, I'm actually going to put my SSD onto my motherboard, so let's do that. So we have our SSD there. So it is an M.2 SSD, and I'm just going to keep touching my case to make sure I'm dissipating any static that builds up on me. I'm going to take the motherboard out of the ESD bag here. And this is when you have to be quite careful because static can build up on the outside of these bags. I'm going to lay my motherboard down on the motherboard bag. What I'm going to do now is just peel this lovely, oh, maybe not so lovely, plastics off of the motherboard. We have a little bit there. I have to get that with my tweezers. A great thing that this kit comes with. Put that up there, here, and then peel this. So with these Aorus motherboards, at least, the M.2s actually have these covers on them. So what I'm going to do is remove the top cover and install my SSD into this top slot. Good. This just slips out like that. Put that over here. They have thermal pads on them, which is nice. So as you can see, there's actually little spaces where you've got to put a standoff. And so I'm going to take a screw that came with the motherboard and an M.2 standoff, which is basically a screw that allows a screw to be screwed into it. Yes, that is what standoff is. And I'm going to open these up and get that ready so I can put my SSD in here. I love M.2 SSDs because they are just absolutely amazing and so tiny. So what I'm going to do is just look, take a glance so I know how long I need to be. This is an 80mm SSD, so I'm going to install my standoff to this hole. This could actually be a little harder than I expected. Okay, there we go. That's installed. So now what we do, again, touching the case a bunch, is install the M.2. So it just goes in. So this can be a little deceiving. On this particular motherboard, you have this top notch, and that's actually where your cover goes. So you want to go below that top notch. You want to go flat, push the actual SSD in, and then it should go up like that, like it's got a little spring on it. Touching the case again, now you take the screw for the M.2 and you screw this in. Screw goes around, put our SSD in, and it's in nicely now. And what we do is we take the cover piece, which we have here, you peel this, that's a thermal pad under there, and then you're going to install it. So you go into that top slot, drop it down, and then once again you're going to want to screw that in to the motherboard. Good, SSD has been installed. So now what I'm going to do is install my motherboard into my case. Now I have heard rumors that this motherboard, or that this case, can be a bit difficult to work with in this regard, so we're just going to be nice and slow and we're going to take our time on this installation. So the nice thing about our motherboard is that it includes a pre-installed I/O shield, which is, as you can see right here. Putting the I/O shield in is a common place where people make errors, and Ellen, on her first PC build, misinstalled her I/O shield, which led me to make many jokes about the whole thing. So don't misinstall your I/O shield. And actually, before I install my motherboard, I need to make sure that I have all the right standoffs installed. And so the interesting thing about this motherboard is it actually has space for all the standoffs. And the interesting thing about this case is that none of the standoffs are actually installed. So I'm going to have to go and install all of those standoffs. So one thing I didn't know, because I actually haven't ever had a case that didn't have pre-installed standoffs, they actually give you this very nice tool that has a little like kind of Allen key hex bit on one side and then a Phillips head on the other side. And so what you can do is you drop that on your standoff, and then you just screw it in with a screwdriver, which is very logical. That makes a lot of sense. So we do that, take it off, standoff is installed. Wonderful. So I'm going to continue installing all these standoffs. This is also the only PC case I've owned so far that actually uses, motherboard I've owned so far that actually uses every one of the standard standoffs. So that's a little fun / annoying, because I got to go and install 9 of them. Usually it's 7 or 8 that I install, but it's fine. We can do this. Okay, so we've now installed all of our standoffs. I did it with Ellen's help, so thank you, Ellen. Before I put my motherboard in, I'm just going to actually open up the RAM slots, because I can find that a little annoying in the case. So now they're all open and ready to accept memory. So I'm just going to touch the case again, and I'm going to pick up the motherboard and slide it in. It's okay to take your time with this. So indeed, my worst fears have been realized, and this motherboard is not going to fit under that fan. So we're going to have to take the case fan out, and then we will do the motherboard after that. So as you can see, we had to remove this rear case fan. As I mentioned, we might need to. A little annoying, but I suppose since it's pretty large, 140mm fan, I guess it was necessary. Okay, so we're going to install our motherboard now. Again, touching the case. Now that we've removed our fan, we should be great. We won't have any issues installing the motherboard. So I'm just going to slide it in. Now, what you can do is just kind of place it down, I find, and then once you've placed it down, you can just adjust once you actually start putting your screws in. So I'm just going to pick it up by the edges. You just want to locate your standoffs underneath. So almost lost the screw. So I can see my first standoff. Usually it's good to go from the middle. So we're going to start with the middle one. Install that screw first. Generally with PC hardware, you don't need to super crank down the screws, and I really recommend avoiding that because you do not want to damage again, your expensive hardware, and that's part of why building PCs can be pretty stressful, and why I've avoided filming in the past is because, you know, you're holding a couple $100 worth of gear, possibly a couple $1,000 worth of gear in your hands, and it would be pretty embarrassing to film yourself destroying it. So helpfully, Ellen is helping me installing the last few screws into the motherboard so that we can basically move on to the next step, which will be installing, I think, our CPU. So next up is the, to be honest, my least favorite part of any PC builds, and that is the AIO cooler. While I do like AIO coolers, installing them is an experience in stress management. You know, it's stressful to put these things on because you have to fool around with the CPU, and when you're doing that, it's just never very fun. It's always stressful. So I'm gonna open it up. You guys can take a look. This is a relatively new one from Corsair. I think the H100i RGB Pro XT. I wasn't aiming to have RGB stuff, but it's always nice. It looks pretty, you know. I like pretty shiny things, and so I went with this one. And it's got standard magnetic levitation fans, no RGB on the fans, but I don't really mind. Again, I don't care about the RGB too much. So just pull out our fans, and I removed the magnetic top filter from the case. So we're going to install it in the top. It's going to still be a positive airflow situation because we have 4 140s coming in, and then a 140 coming out, and 2 120s, so it should be roughly equal, if not slightly positive, which is exactly what you would hope for, because it should minimize the accumulation of dust in our system, which is always the goal. I've never installed an AMD Ryzen CPU. My first build ever had an FX AMD CPU, but it should be fun. Okay, so this is one of the ones that slides apart, which is nice. Okay, cool. So now we're going to actually go and install the fans and the radiator in the system. I like to leave these kind of fan cables strapped up. It makes them a little easier to work with. What we're going to do is have these fans pointing up and pulling air through the radiator out the top of the case. So let's kind of plan that out now. Getting the first fan kind of into the radiator. Okay, I think you can let go there. Okay, so that's done. I recommend to kind of loosely install the fans at first, get everything kind of connected, and then you can, once they're, you know, you're not fully screwed in, once you've got everything connected, then what you can do is do the fine adjustment to get the radiator placement and the fans and such exactly where you want them. So because of the way the radiator is situated, it's super tight, so I'm going to actually install the CPU and EPS connectors, or CPU EPS connector, into my motherboard before finishing installing the radiator for my water cooler. And so I'm going to get out these cable mod cables, and you guys can take a look at those. So these are red sleeved cables. They kind of match the red aesthetic of the case, so that's why I chose them. But honestly, any color of cables from Cable Mod are just really nice, super premium feeling, and oh, look at that red cableage. So just put this stuff over here into a big pile. So what we're looking for is our CPU. So I'm going to be looking for, so this is a 2 4s, okay, great. So this is going to do our 4-pin into our CPU EPS, and then we're going to take one of the 8 pins, and that will be used for EPS as well. Installing this will be a bit of a hassle though, because I've got to get in right near this radiator. Oh, okay, beautiful, done. Great, so we've got one installed. Now we just got to get the other installed. I do generally recommend installing your CPU connectors from the motherboard side because getting these installed by pulling them through and doing a 180 bend, if you have not tiny hands, it is incredibly painful. So yeah, try to do this all with the cables starting at the motherboard and then ending up at the PSU. So what we have now is we have installed our radiator. I've completed my breathing exercises to relax after the very stressful process of installing this radiator. It's pretty tight, but I think everything looks good. So we're going to move on to installing our CPU, which is by far the most stressful part of any PC build. So I'm going to open this up and you can take a look at this Ryzen 3900X processor. It should be quite nice. I think knife here, perfect. Should be good. Keep touching my box. Awesome. So we have this cool Ryzen sticker. Oh, fancy, fancy. You have the processor, which is, that's lovely. You have the processor with all the pins on the back. Very frightening. Put that up there. You gotta love these boxes because they are giant, and yet they basically just have a cooler and a CPU in them. And the CPU is the only thing we even need. So there's an important, please read. There's a certificate of authenticity. So hopefully this has instructions. I believe I am all good for installing the CPU in the socket, but I always just want to make sure. Open it, put it in, lock it. Okay, this is just as easy as expected. So there is a pretty nice CPU cooler included with the Ryzen processors. I guess I can show you guys. It's this Wraith cooler. It's RGB. It says AMD on it. It's a lot better than the stock Intel ones, and again, it kind of shows how far AMD has come and how far ahead they are of Intel. But we won't need, of course, any of that, and we are just going to go straight on to installing our processor. Now, let me just clear the way. So I'm just going to open up the retention arm on the socket. This entire kind of socket plate moves. And now I'm just going to prep the CPU, put the CPU in. I have my mounting hardware, I think. So I'm just going to get that ready. So what you want to do with the mounting hardware is, and this is going to go up like this, is you want to take your screw with the hook on it and just lightly put the other end on it. You want to do it really lightly because you want to give yourself lots of room when you're installing it. And so this is an interesting mechanism. Not sure how much of a fan I am of the fact that it literally only has the fact that it has quite literally only 2 points of contact with the motherboard, but we will see. Okay, so we're going to take our processor now, and I'm going to really carefully open this up. Working with processors is always a stressful experience. Try to open that up. Okay, so we have our processor. Grab it by the sides. Don't touch the IHS if you can, avoid it. And then we just lower it in. You can just wiggle it a little, make sure it's all good. There. CPU is installed in the socket. Okay, so here's the last stressful part of today's build. The actual putting the water block on. So we have some nice pre-applied thermal paste. Actually, it's probably not that nice, but you know it's going to do fine for us. I'm just going to lean back from the case to try to avoid getting any lint or anything on the CPU that's now sitting in the socket. Okay, so we've removed that. So what we're going to do is just pull the mounting pieces off. they are really in there. So that's wonderful. Start installing the D1 on this side. So that just clicks in. It's great. It's hard because I don't want to launch this piece. So that's done. Put the hardware all the way on. So we've got them on. Now I'm just going to try to tighten this down. I've got them quite tight and it actually bows a bit. That's okay. That's supposedly how this mounting system is supposed to act. It's supposed to bow out a bit. And there's supposed to be some stops. So those will prevent over tightening of these screws. So that is really nice and tight on there, not going anywhere. You just want it to be tight so that you can still hand loosen it, but it's not easy to hand loosen. So go a little like half turn past where you can get it with your hands, and then we're good. CPU cooler's installed. Okay, CPU is installed. The worst part of this build is now over, and we get to have a lot of fun doing things like cable management. So now I'm going to put away my CPU box and get out my beautiful Trident C RGB RAM, of which I think I mentioned that we have 64 gigs. We sometimes run VMs and stuff, and so it's just great to have a bunch of RAM. This is, as I mentioned, 3600 megahertz, and it also includes a sticker. We have so many stickers, it's absolutely wonderful. Not going to install them, but there you go. There's your RAM. Very nice, and I've always liked the design of this RAM. So it's going to be dual channel. You're going to be populating all the slots. So you just align your notch in your RAM with the notch in your slots, and yeah, get to installing it. Okay, so now what we're going to do is tip the case back up. Finally, we are done with having it on its side. Make sure nothing falls here, and we should be good now. So yeah, and that is the piece of plastic I broke on our EPS connector. That's annoying. Okay, cool. So I'm going to start cable managing, and then you guys will see when I'm installing the graphics card. Okay, so as you can see, I've kind of finished doing all my cabling. Yeah, I actually forgot that cabling is another very stressful part of PC building. Turns out that pretty much all of PC building is pretty stressful. Finally, we have the GPU. Well, not finally. There's a couple touches we have to add, but we're almost done. GPU support. Let's get these installed, and then we're pretty much wrapped up. So here is our 2070 Super. an EVGA card, as you probably already saw. Just making sure there's nothing on here that needs to be peeled. All looks pretty good, so we're just going to get on with installing the card. So, the card has a bit of a weird layout as well, but just going to push my power cables to the side here. Try to line this up. And there we go. Okay, so now we're going to install the last piece of the entire system, the GPU support. Yay! So, it's been a very interesting experience. Okay, ready for me to start it up?
Do it.
Hey guys, thanks so much for sticking with us and watching this PC build. I hope you enjoyed it. Obviously we won't be doing a ton of stuff like this, but if you did enjoy it, comment down below, message us on Instagram or Discord. Just, let us know what you think of the build. And as always, have a nice night. There will be a part 2 to this video where we kind of have booted the system up and we compare the performance to the laptop we were using previously. So stick around for that. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next one.